Grace and peace to you. Thank you for joining another episode of the Obnoxious Honesty Podcast. I'm your host, ChuckintheTruth, and on today's pod, we're going to look into the subject of why so many Americans feel like they are overworked and underpaid. Now, we got this 40-hour, 5-day work week that's pretty standard. And I'm going to look a little bit at the history of where that came from. And then I'm going to talk about how the system is really set up the way these businesses and companies want it to be. So it's not broken. It's actually working exactly the way they want it to work. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit. Then I'm going to parallel that mindset and that situation to professional athletes and how professional sports work and kind of show a main difference there. But I think it's real applicable to it. And then, of course, I'm going to attach some scripture to it and help us to recognize there's a passage of scripture that really shows us a very strong principle that we can move forward with concerning the situation. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how daylight savings time actually relates to this whole scenario as well. So I'm real excited for the pod. I think you're going to enjoy it. I think I got some good points that you're going to go away with. But you know what it is. First, let's hit the intro music.
I'm trying to be great, and I'm on my way. It's never too late, and I'm on my way. I'ma leave my mark. Ready, set, go. Ready, set, go. Ready, set, go.
Alright, so let's get into it. First of all, I want to try to jog your memory. Think about your work history. And I feel like many people are going to be able to relate to what I'm about to say. So, you ever start off at a job, right? And of course, you are getting trained by somebody. They're showing you the ropes. They're showing you, how this company does things. They're, after you get past like maybe your new hire paperwork and looking at someone like maybe some training modules like in a book or on a computer. So like I'm talking about after you pass that stuff. I'm talking about when you actually get like hands-on on the floor doing stuff and you work with somebody and they're showing you, hey, this is how you do this is how we do that. So they're showing you processes. They're showing you systems that they do at this particular job, right? So you're getting trained, you're doing all that, you're understanding stuff, you're figuring stuff out as someone's explaining it to you. And inevitably, you come across a scenario where the person who's training you shows you something, and the first thing in your mind is, huh? What? Why do y'all do this like this? Why don't y'all do it like that? Or why don't y'all do this another way? Inevitably, there's something that you're going to come across when someone's training you and showing you the way that their company do things and the way it's done, and you probably going to ask a question. Now, I'm not talking specifically about certain policies and procedures that are like easily shown like in a handbook. I'm talking about something to where, the person training you shows you, hey, yeah, this is how we do this, or we do this way. And you think to yourself, like, there's got to be a better way to do this, or, that seems kind of dumb. That seems kind of stupid. Why do they do this way? Usually that happens. It may not be your first day, your first week, but eventually as you continue to grow and learn more and understand more about the particular job and the company, the industry, whatever, you come across something that you're like, wait a minute, why they should do this thing a different way? That happens a lot. I feel like you listening to me, you can come up with a thought in your mind where you remember that happening at one of your past jobs. And maybe when you ask a question of why this thing is done this way, the answer you got was that famous phrase, oh, this is just how we do it. Or this is how we always done it. This is just how we do it. This is just what we do. And there's no real depth into the answer. It's just, oh, that's how I was shown to do it. That's how someone showed me. That's how so-and-so trained me. And so you may hear a variation of one of those phrases or one of those exact phrases, and you kind of just shrug your shoulders and kind of go along with it. That scenario, that type of situation is a mindset that creeps into so many different areas of our lives. It doesn't just allow itself to stay in that particular context of, an employee learning something new or being trained in something, and there not being no real depth behind something, or someone does something a certain way by habit, because they got their habit from someone else. I heard a story one time of this young married couple. Now I don't know if this story is true, but the principle of it is the point that I'm trying to get across. So the young married couple, the wife starts to cook a ham, and before she cooks the ham, she cuts the edge off the ham. Like, she cuts the end piece off the ham, and she puts it in a pan. She seasons it, whatever, and puts it in an oven. And her husband was happened to be sitting at the kitchen table, and he saw his wife do this. And so the husband asked the wife, "Hey, honey, why did you cut the edge off that ham? Like, why did you cut the end off that ham?" And the wife says, "I don't know. I mean, that's just how my mom used to do it. I saw my mom do it that way." So the husband's curious, and the husband's like, that's weird. I wonder what it does. Like, and so he asks her questions. He's like, does it have something to do with the moisture of the ham? Does it have something to do with the seasoning or the taste? Like, what? Why? And the wife's like, "I don't know. I just know my mom used to do it that way." So the wife calls her mom up. "Hey, mom, why did you used to cut the end off the ham before you cooked it?" And the mom tells the daughter, that's just the way my mom used to do it. So now it goes back to the grandmother. So the daughter asked the mother, "So can you ask grandma why she used to do it?" And so the mother calls the grandmother and says, "Hey, mom, the daughter's asking what's the deal with cutting the end off the ham. Like, I always used to see you do that, and she does it because of me, but I never knew why you did it. I just did it because you did it." And the grandmother tells the mother, "Oh, well, when me and your father were younger, I had a pan that was too small to cook the whole ham, so I'd always have to cut the edge off the ham just so it could fit in my smaller pan." So the original reason for why the grandmother was cutting the ham off was just because her pan was too small. And so her daughter never asked the mom the origin of it or why she did it. She just went along with it and followed suit, not knowing that her pan was big enough. Like, she didn't have the same issue to where the grandmother had to, do something like a problem solving method. The daughter didn't have to do that same thing, but she did it anyway because that's all she knew. And then as she grew up and she ended up having a daughter, and that daughter saw her do the same thing, and so then it trickles down to, who the granddaughter, the wife in the story that I started with. So that type of situation, like, once again, I don't know how true that story is, but the premise behind that story, the point of the story is, don't just do something by habit. Don't just do something by rote. You should know the origins and the reasons why you're doing something. That's just the way it's always been done, or that's the way we've always done it. That's the way so-and-so taught me. That's the way so-and-so showed me. Those, a lot of times, aren't really the best reasons to do something, especially when the thing that you're doing seems to be maybe a little bit strange, or maybe you can think of other ways that the thing could be done. So that little story about the ham and the pan, that describes a lot about where we are nowadays in America in 2022. So here is how I want to connect that mindset to today. Let's go back and talk about how the labor laws in America came to be the way they are. I would say the vast majority of us in the workforce, we understand a certain set or a certain portion of, like, underlying rules and laws that are contained in it. Like, most of us understand that you have to be 15 to get a job, right? And there are certain hours that you are limited to working, in terms of, like, working in the daylight, or working just a certain amount of hours per week. You can't work too many more. It can't be like within school. You can't mess around with your school hours. So, we understand those like child labor laws in terms of like teenagers and the prohibition of anyone younger than a certain age. So we understand there's certain child labor laws where only children of a certain teenage can work, and then even within that, they can only work a certain amount of hours. So we have those limitations. And then after that, there's kind of this overall understanding of the 40-hour work week, the 5-day 40-hour work week, or the 4-day 40-hour work week. So the 4 10-hour shifts or the 5 8-hour shifts, right? So we kind of have understanding there. That's a lot of how work is for many people across many different industries in this country. And you may be familiar with the phrase that was coined a while ago: 8 hours to work, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours to do as I please. I remember being in high school, my social studies teacher, at one point when we were studying through American history, I remember she mentioned that phrase a couple of times, and it always stuck with me because I thought it was kind of catchy. And back in the time where it was first coined, when the labor laws were being developed in this country, I felt like that was a good little thing to remember. So you may be familiar with that phrase, may not be, but when you think about the work week and how many different companies, many different industries have that schedule for their employees, 5 8-hour shifts, right? But besides those, the child labor laws and the expectation of the 40-hour work week, mostly 5 days a week, most people that I've come across don't really have a full understanding, or even a better understanding than just those two things, about the actual labor laws in this country and the way that they are affected by them. Many of us probably just see them as, limitations. Like, we're limited to do this. And, if you work over 40 hours, then you get overtime. You get time and a half. People know about that overtime, right? People know how to calculate their time and a half. Now, ain't nothing wrong with that. But when we think about the 40-hour, 5-day work week in the context of work-life balance and what work-life balance looks like for a large section of the American working population, work-life balance is really messed up. And it leads to far too many people feeling like they are overworked and underpaid. But as I mentioned in the intro to the show today, that's exactly the way the system is set up to be. You're supposed to feel overworked and underpaid. And let me explain to you why. In August of 1886, the National Labor Union first asked Congress to mandate an 8-hour workday, and they were quickly denied. Like, nah, it ain't happening. But 9 months later, on May 1st in 1867, Illinois became the first state to pass a law to mandate an 8-hour workday. But the problem was, a bunch of companies just refused to abide by the law. Then in 1869, President Grant did a proclamation for government workers to mandate an 8-hour workday. And nothing really happened for almost 20 years, till you had 1886, when the first major event happened. Now, by then, the original organization, National Labor Union, they had already disbanded, but there was some other smaller organizations just sprinkled throughout the country, and they actually organized 300,000 workers to strike on May 1st. And in Chicago, there were people that were killed with the police in something called the Haymarket Affair. It happened May 1st, 1886. The police actually killed some of the national workers in Chicago who were striking for this demonstration. But check this out. It took another 20 years for any real thing to happen to change it. And in 1906, that's when you had an 8-hour workday that was instituted at two major companies in the printing industry. So that was big at the time. Then 10 years later, there was the Adamson Act that gave 8-hour workday for railroad workers. But still, you had another 10 years in 1926 till something big actually happened when Henry Ford of Ford Motors adopted the 5-day, 40-hour work week. That was in 1926. Now, follow me. I started with August of 1866 when a request for the 8-hour workday was first put to Congress. Then it was 60 years later when Ford adopted the 5-day, 40-hour work week. 60 years, man. And then in 38, it was the Fair Labor Standards Act that limited the work week to 44 hours. And then a couple years later, they changed that to what we have now, the 40-hour work week. So this movement took a long time, really close to 100 years, from 1866 to 1940, for what was considered to be some reasonable limitations to the work week. So people went from working 100 hours in a bunch of different factories around the country to an actual limit of 40 hours, 5 8-hour days. So 1940. So that's what I wanted to give a background to relate to the stories I told earlier about how people just kind of go along with something that's been put into effect for a long time, and they feel like just because this is the way we've been doing it for a long time, that automatically means it's okay. Like, oh, this is just how it's been for a long time. This is what I knew it as. This is what my granddaddy knew it as. And for some reason, people feel like that is okay. In some contexts, yeah. But in this context, it ain't okay. 1940 is when the last time the work week was amended. And here we are in 2022. So you mean to tell me it was 74 years from 1866 to 1940, and from 1940 when the Fair Labor Standards Act went into effect for the 5-day, 40-hour work week limitation, you mean to tell me we've gone 82 years without amending it?
That isn't the right logic.
Now, hopefully I didn't bore you with going through the history with the dates like that, but I really wanted to paint a picture and explain that just because something was done for a long time doesn't mean it's the right way to do things. Now, I'm not going to try to go too deep into it, but there is a bunch of different studies out there that have been done on working and labor and productivity among employees across many different industries, specifically in the U.S. Now, obviously, I know it's been done around the world, but I'm in the U.S. I'm in the U.S. my whole life, so obviously that's going to be the focus of my pod and the attention where it's going. But out of all these different studies that's been done, two main things have been shown. One, you got a lot of people, a good percentage of people that are working over 40 hours anyway, especially like managers and people in higher than entry level positions. So you got a lot of people working over 40 hours anyway. And then the other thing you realize that these studies have shown is there is a serious lack of actual productivity among these people. So you're working all these big long hours throughout the day, all these long hours that add up throughout the week, and the actual productivity that's being done in those hours is minimal compared to what it could be with less time. So basically, there's more of a focus on how long you're at the job as opposed to how much production you're getting done while at the job. Let me say that again. There's more focus on how long you're at the job than how much productivity you're getting done while you're at the job. And that is the fundamental difference that needs to be changed among our work hours in the way that they are handled in America. Now, let me dive a little bit deeper into that. This is what I mean. Companies want you as the employees to be overworked and underpaid because that's how they maximize their profits as a company, which tends to go to the higher and upper management levels. Those bonuses for profitability get distributed mostly to the higher level executives and managers in most corporations and businesses. That's how this works. So they want the lower level employees to be squeezed for the trickle down of the profits that happen. They want the majority of it, and then they'll trickle down kind of what's left over to give to the lower level employees, which always outnumber those high level executives anyway. So you got the high level executives getting the larger portion of profits, and then they're trickling down smaller portions of profits to be spread out among more people, which makes it even smaller and more incremental to each individual. This is not accidental. This is purposeful. This is how the system was set up to be. And it's working like a charm. Now, I'm not breaking no news here. You may be thinking to yourself, duh, everybody knows that. Well, that's my exact issue. The fact that everybody does know that, and we're not doing anything as a collective group to change it. Now, there's multiple layers to unpack here. Now, the most recent statistics that you can look up, and I did this for this pod, for employed Americans says about 159 million employed Americans. It's really like 159,820,000. So we're talking like right under 160 million people. There is almost an exact same amount of people that voted in the last presidential election in 2020. It's almost exact. If you look at the presidential election numbers in 2020, some reports say 158 million, some say 159. One I saw was up to 161 million. But even if it's 161 million, if you compare that to the employed Americans, that's right under 160 million. So we're talking barely a difference of 2 million people that are not employed, those that are voted in the election in 2020 versus those who are currently listed as employed as of February of 2022. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that every single employed American voted, but the point I'm trying to make is if every single employed American voted for a politician that was determined and had promised to change the labor laws immediately as a first point of business that they did, that president would win. That's the point I'm trying to make. The numbers are so overwhelming for the amount of people who are working versus how many people generally will vote in a presidential election. We have the power to change whatever we want to change. That's the point I'm trying to make. And that's what like blows my mind about our society. We don't understand how collectively strong we could be because we stay divided over so many stupid things. But what really trips me out is if you want to stay divided over the stupid things, that's fine. Who cares? But don't let the division over the minuscule things distract you from the unity that should be had for more important things. Things that could be a drastic improvement for, I'm going to use air quotes, the greater good. You know, the vast majority of people, specifically working, tax-paying Americans, that working middle class, that's the backbone, the literal backbone of this country is the working middle class. And that is the group of people who actually hold the most power but don't yield and use that power that they have. That same group is the class that's getting squeezed the hardest and bearing the brunt of the whole nation. And each of us feels that individually when we feel like we are overworked and underpaid. It's because we are. It's because that's how the system was set up to be. And as I said earlier, the system is working perfectly. So that's the first layer. The first layer is there's approximately 160 million working Americans, and that number is enough that if we who are bearing the biggest burden of this country as working, tax-paying people in society, if that group of people would stop being so disorganized on this particular issue of labor laws and work-life balance, we all could make a drastic change for the better for each of our own individual lives in terms of our pay, in terms of the amount of hours we work in a week. We can make a 36-hour work week. We can make a 32-hour work week. We could change that if we were united enough.
He's out of line, but he's right.
And I feel my perspective on this is very unique because of the lower level management experience, the lower to mid-level management experience that I've had throughout my 16-year career. So I've had times where I was just that minimum wage hourly employee. I've had time where I was at. I've had time when I was the supervisor with just a few people over me. Under me and a few people over me. I've had times where I've had a lot of people under my authority, and I had less people over me in authority. And so to the point where I'm at now, where I'm a store manager, where at my specific store, I have the most authority and I have no one over me. But company wide, there's still people over me. Even though the higher you go up in management, the less connected you are to the people that are further higher up. So, like, for example, as a store manager, the store manager is the highest rank in their store, and all of their employees under them, there's a direct line of communication to them. Now maybe there's an assistant manager or a shift manager, depending on what industry or business you're in or whatever. But the point is, you can go directly to your manager, or if you have a shift manager or assistant manager, you can go to your immediate supervisor and then your immediate supervisor. There's that direct line of communication that is easier in like a specific store setting or a specific plant branch or whatever setting that it may be in terms of that particular location. Now, company wide, we understand there's a hierarchy and more higher authority figures, but they're more far removed. Those people become just names, names on the email signature, or just names that you hear your manager mention every now and then. So there's a disconnection to how real they are. That's pretty much the whole point of the show Undercover Boss. Those people, those CEOs, presidents, and executives or whatever, they go down to those particular, specific locations, and they, put on a disguise or whatever and give you a fake name. That's a lot easier to do Undercover Boss because, once again, there's generally that big disconnection in most companies for, lower level employees and upper management. So when you have less access to those higher level executives and managers, you tend to feel that your opinions on specific things that the company does aren't as valued. You start to innately feel lower and less than, and you don't generally crave giving your input on larger level decisions for the company. And that aspect is related to you feeling overworked and underpaid. It's almost like you are subconsciously being told that you're not important and you don't matter and you're not really valued. So you tend to accept other behaviors that keep giving you that same message, and you're less likely to fight back and actually feel like you should try to initiate some type of change. And that's the second level of it. The high level executives, the decision makers, people who actually decide how the business is going to run, who sit in board meetings, the board of directors, those type of people, they're the ones that allow this to happen as well. So like I said, the first level is the employees themselves allowing this to happen, which is the biggest group of people, the vast majority, the largest number of people, that 160 or so million that I mentioned earlier. And then you have the people who actually make the things happen, the decision makers, those high level executives. That's a much smaller set of people. Now, I didn't look this up, but those people are actually probably included in that 160 million. Those like high level executives of these, these larger businesses and companies I'm talking about. However, those people are so severely outnumbered based off of what I was saying earlier with how there needed to be change, and if there was actual unity among the lower level workers, this change could happen, specifically in the context of voting for change under specific lawmakers who would be able to make those things happen. Because the lawmakers are just supposed to represent us as a people. So the first couple layers is the people that make those things up in the world, the workers, the first layer, the high level executives, the second layer. Then the third layer is the politicians. The politicians, they are very similar to these high level executives that I'm talking about. And those people being the third layers, those lawmakers, they just get into the habit of just, doing what they want to do and making the laws that they want to make. And they are focused on, re-election when that time comes up. But for the most part, they don't have most of the people's best interests at heart. That's just not what most politicians are doing. And once again, they represent us. So we have this group of people who are supposed to be representing us, but yet there's so many things that are done and so many things that aren't done that don't equate to what the group, that main working class group, wants. So again, this third level of the politicians, that's another part I'm going to get into another day, but I have to allude to that because that's a portion of it. So once again, I consider that the third level, the politicians. But the disconnect that I want to focus on there is that the representation that they're supposed to be doing of that larger working class group, they're not doing, and we're allowing it. So that brings it back to just the original group that I'm talking about. Business and politics are very related to one another. It's a really easy connection to see between the two. And that's where we need to influence the mindset change of how businesses are ran. Now, I mentioned earlier about how businesses will make you feel overworked and underpaid because that's how the system's set up to be. And I talked earlier about those labor laws that were enacted in 1938 and then put into effect in 1940. Now, here's the key historical context behind that. That was right after the Depression. So those companies were able to work employees 90, 100 hours a week because people were just so happy to actually have a job, to actually have any kind of means of income, that they were willing to accept any kind of work conditions. And that is why that was allowed. Now, of course, when that Fair Labor Standards Act went into effect, there was that time of change. But once again, the historical context, the mindset behind the people was they was just so happy to have a job. That's not the mindset of people in society nowadays. There's a little bit more understanding in people that they allow the businesses to continue to be able to profit and to continue to be able to grow. So since people generally understand their value a little bit more, but there's still a large group of that population that doesn't focus on it or allow it. I talked on my first pod about intentionality, going through experiences with intentionality. So I talked about that on the first pod. So if you didn't listen to the first pod, go ahead and check that out. But there is a understanding that you learn more when you go through an experience with focus and intent. And when you're just going to work every day without a whole lot of actual intent to how this relates to you and your life in the bigger picture, that's why there's that mindset of just allowing businesses to treat you however they want. So the point is, businesses are going to treat you however you allow them to treat you. And again, I mentioned earlier the way that businesses focus more on how many hours you're at work producing rather than focusing on how much you produce in the hours you're at work. And this is where I'm going to relate that in the business world to professional sports. So professional sports is a really good microcosm of society in a lot of ways, because once again, it makes up a group of people within a subset. So you have this situation with athletes. Their job is to win games. That's their job. The organization's job, the goal of the people that go into the organization is to do whatever you can in your job to win games. That's the point. Win games. All right. So they have a clear objective. They have a clear goal. They have a clear purpose, a clear intent and aim. Win games. So as the athletes' jobs, their jobs is to study film and tape and to learn their opponent so that they can prepare to, stop the things their opponent wants to do and to do what they want to do. They learn their different methods and, all these different things in practice. So, the coaches and the players, they commit to doing those things. The players, they commit to working on their bodies. The trainers, they commit to having workout plans and for the trainers. Then they have nutritionists that, do research on, the best foods to eat for the players. And so you have all of these different hands that are going into this effort to win games. Now, there is not a specific amount of hours that is given to professional athletes that say, hey, you have to be at the training facility or the team stadium or whatever it is, the practice facilities or whatever. There's not a specific amount of, hey, you have to do this, 40 hours out the week or whatever. Now they have specific times that they do practice in terms of, hey, practice is going to be from 2 to 4 or here and there. So you have that practice time or film session time that the pro athletes go through, but their individual time that's not specific team activities, that's still more hours that you're supposed to be able to work. You're still supposed to be able to go to the gym and work out and train, and they're still expected to do that. You should still be studying film and studying tape, even if it's without the coaches or whatever. You think about, some of the most successful professional athletes that we've had recently throughout history. A lot of times you'll hear stories about how they were a workaholic. They were always watching film. You hear that about Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. They were always watching film. They were always watching tape to learn their opponent. You hear those stories. You hear stories about LeBron and Kobe always being in the gym, always working out, always working on their game. Like you hear those stories. Their focus was not, hey, I got to get these 40 hours in. Their focus was not, hey, I got to get these 60 hours in, the 80s, however many hours a week. That wasn't their focus. Their focus was to complete a task. They were task oriented. The task is to win games. So in professional sports, there is a focus on completing tasks, not the specific amount of hours that you're expected to be there. So if we, as the American working people, if we would allow that mindset to be put into the business world, then that's a way that we could have some change going on. The fact that we have that precedent already set, that task oriented or goal completion being the more focus of an organization, can lead to the employees working a certain way and being a certain way. In pro sports, we have that set already. We have that mindset. We have that culture already set to where it's an expectation that you're task oriented or goal oriented. And it's not, the focus on how many hours you're there to complete that task and be productive. It's more focused on completing tasks, being productive to be able to make a goal in a certain amount of hours. However many hours it takes you to do that, that's how many hours it takes you. So the point I'm trying to make is we can have that same mindset shift as working class Americans within that goal. And that's where we have to be united together to make sure that our politicians are actually representing us the way that they're supposed to be. If the people, the majority of people have the same unity and the same goal and desire, then we should elect politicians that align with that goal. That's another thing that's so backwards. We have the politicians giving their um, things that they want to do, and then people align behind that. That's backwards to me. It should be the people having desires and having things they want to do and get done a certain way, and then the politicians align behind that. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be set up. Now, obviously, that only works within certain contexts, because I know the immediate opposite argument to that would be, oh well, the majority of people, they don't know about this or that or this, and so there's a lot of stuff that the politicians know that we don't know, and so yeah, I get all that. I'm not focusing on that. What I'm saying is there's certain focuses that we need to have that are more important than other things. And I'm not saying that other things aren't important whatsoever. These other topics or subjects that politicians get divided on or whatever. I'm not saying those things aren't important. The point I'm trying to make is just as the group of people that we are, the sheer numbers that the American working class have, we don't have to just stay comfortable with this expected 40-hour work week. If we forced the issue like they did back in the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s to early 1900s, if we force the issue like they did, we can enact change as well. And I'm of the belief that it wouldn't take the from 1866, when the first labor union tried it, to 1938, when President Roosevelt actually put the Fair Standards Labor Act, signed it. I know 70 years wouldn't have to pass for us to change the work week from 40 hours to, what, 32 or 36. And hey, as long as we're changing, maybe we want to change it to something shorter. Maybe we want to change it to 28. I don't know. But the point is, we can lower it, we can lessen it. And there have also been enough studies done on work and productivity to show that businesses will not be losing money. They'd actually have more productive employees. Once again, being task oriented or goal oriented, you are going to focus more on, hey, I got to get this done. I got to complete this task. I got to do this. I got to do that. See, the problem right now is we just think, hey, I'm going to be here for 8 hours, so whatever. So, a lot of times there's a 4-minute task that you can complete in 4 minutes, but you complete it in 15. Because why rush? You got to be here 8 hours anyway. And then some people work 10 hours a day. So you really stretching out tasks and making things stretch, that you're not being as productive as you could be. So if you shorten the overall amount of hours people are there in a week, they're going to be more productive while they're there. And so when you have more productivity in the specific shorter hours that you're going to be there, you're getting tasks done, and then the companies is still going to be profitable. They're not going to be losing profits because, oh well, we're paying people this amount, and they're working less hours. No, you're going to have happier employees. Employees are going to be able to most likely stay at jobs longer, so you have less employee turnover and more employee retention. That's a cost saving metric that businesses keep track of, employee retention, because it costs money to replace an old employee with a new employee in terms of lost productivity and time trained and things of that nature. So businesses keep track of that type of stuff. It's similar to like customer acquisition costs. Business keep track of how much it costs them to gain a new customer instead of retaining old customers. It's the same thing with employees. Because again, businesses will treat you how you allow them to treat you. And if there's an overall societal mindset shift and mindset change, then they can't just replace their old employees with new employees, because new employees are going to expect that same type of thing in terms of the hours and the work-life balance. Because, I work 50 hours a week. There's some positions and that you are having to work 50 hours instead of 40 hours. They're called exempt. There's a difference between exempt and non-exempt employees. So that's another thing in the tax law that's insane. But when you talk about the different expectations that come with a 40-hour work week, then you're also, when you think about your work-life balance, there's commute times are a lot differently. So once again, back in 38, when they put those 40-hour work weeks, the commute times weren't crazy, right? People were going to work in the factory in town. They probably just, walk to work, or, some that had cars, they drive to work. The commute times were shorter. A lot of times commute times are longer with people now. And then, of course, getting the process of getting ready, and then you attribute to your downtime as well. Like, you can, between commute and between getting ready and all that, like, you're attributing more than just 8 hours of that day, of the work day, that you're at work. And then some jobs, yeah, they give you like a hour lunch, right? So that hour lunch is actually included, is not included in that time. So that's even more time that you're spending there. So in the 8 hour workday, if you get an hour lunch in the 8 hour workday, you still are tied to whatever area you're at that job. So you're calculating, okay, if I go get lunch, I have to spend this amount of time so I can get back to be back on the clock for this time when my hour lunch is over. So you're attributing that to it as well. And that takes away your time. So you actually, instead of just spending 8 hours there, you're actually spending 9 hours at the job. But then you have that, break, your hour lunch, where you're not getting paid and you're not on the clock, but you're still tied to the location of that business. Are you still tied to having to be close to that? And then again, once you calculate, commute time and getting ready, and then when you get home and, detox, and, maybe you got to take a shower as well afterwards, and, getting whatever time that you have to detox and finish with work. So now you're talking that 8 hour workday is actually closer to 10 or 11 hours, based off of how much time you had to allocate to work. So not just being at work, the time that you had allocated to work is almost half the day. And get to 10, 11 hours, and now we're talking pretty much half your day in the work day allotted to your job. And so that's killing our work-life balance. So again, we're shortening the expected hours and shortening it from 5 days to 4 days, because even if you spend a little bit of less time, you're still attributing more time to work. So that's why the work week, if it was 4 days instead of 5 days, now you have that third day, you have that 3 day weekend, that extra time to be able to do whatever you want, that extra time to be able to, invest in any kind of side business you may have, or invest in traveling, or, spend more time doing things that you want to do in life. Because the quality of life, the quality of your life here in America, people want it to be better. I mean, people from all over the world, other countries, move here in America because their quality of life is better in our country than it is in theirs. I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to paint the picture that America is such a terrible country. That's definitely not what I'm trying to do, because there's, obviously, this is one of the best places to live in the world. So don't even have to even go through that. That's just understood. But that doesn't mean we can't keep getting better. As a matter of fact, I feel like we have the responsibility to keep getting better, not just be happy and be content where we're at societally in the world, but we have the responsibility to keep making the lives of Americans better, to keep making the quality of our lives better. And this, 5 day, 40-hour work week is one of the main detriments to that. You got so many people across the country that don't take, their vacation days, or when they take their vacation days, it's just an off day. A lot of times we even say that. We say off days instead of vacation days because we're not even really taking vacations. We're just off from work. And you do something, and a lot of times you're so tired that you don't really do anything. And then, of course, you got a lot of jobs out there who, kind of do this like subconscious guilt trip on employees for even wanting to take their days off. You ever take a day off, or, take multiple days off, or you put in your request, or however that is at your job, you put that in, and then your manager, or, people above you are like, oh man, we got this things need to get done, or, they kind of give you this guilt trip for even wanting to use your days. And then, of course, we understand there's a lot of situations where you take some time off from work, you take a few days off, and you do a lot to get ready to take that time off. Then you take those days off and you come back to work, and there's a bunch of stuff waiting for you that you need to get done. So now, as soon as you get back to work, you're bombarded with a whole bunch of things that you got to do. And so now it's like you done wasted your days off because the stress that you had before going on vacation is right back to you when you get back from vacation, because there's so many things you didn't do in those times that you did take off. So now you need another vacation to just come back from the vacation that you just had. These are the types of scenarios that millions of us have an issue with or have a problem with. But yet, we just go on about our business and just like, oh, this is a part of how it is to have a job. This is a part of our situation. We just got to deal with it. But it doesn't make any sense because too many of us have the same thought. We don't need to keep going along with it. We can change it. So yeah, it's a lot of layers. It's a lot of levels to this, and I'm not even touching a lot of it. That there's different amendments and changes that were made to the Fair and Standard Labor Act that I didn't really go into because I'm trying to stay focused on the same point. I didn't talk about like overtime pay, and there's exempt and non-exempt employees, which means like depending on your title, a lot of times it's manager or supervisor, but depending on your title, you don't even get paid for time and a half. You're exempt from time and a half. Why would I want to be exempt from time and a half? Exempt from overtime pay? Why was that even agreed? But there, like I said, there's a lot of different directions I could have went, but I was just trying to stay on one track. There's too many of us in the American working class that yield power, but we're just not using it. We allow ourselves to stay in a rut, stay in unhappy situations, things that we don't really love, and situations that we can actually have the power to change, but we just stay in it. In 1926 was when Henry Ford first established that 40-hour 5-day work week. And then, of course, in 38, I mentioned how that's when Roosevelt signed it into practice, and it actually went fully into practice in 1940, 2 years later. So think about it. How much has our society changed since 1940? How many things were appropriate back then in 1940 that aren't appropriate now? How has humans, how have we as humans evolved and changed and developed scientifically, physically, technologically? Like, I'm talking drastic changes, but yet for some reason we want to hold on and cling to this archaic 40-hour 5-day work week. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, lastly, I want to attach this thought process to a passage of scripture that I think is really fitting. So in Genesis chapter 10, there's a bunch of genealogy about Noah and his three sons and how they multiplied and they had people and children under them or after them. So God's desire was for them to multiply, be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth. He wanted them to scatter and fill the earth. So they weren't supposed to stay in the same area. They're supposed to keep scattering and keep filling different parts of the earth. Well, you can't fill the earth if you stay in the same area. Well, that's where chapter 11 in the Tower of Babel comes from. Like, you're familiar with that term. Oh, they were just babbling. They were babbling along. It means like they're speaking gibberish. They're not talking and making any sense in what they're saying. Well, this comes from chapter 11 of Genesis with the Tower of Babel, because that was a place where God confused the languages. Because that verse 1 in Genesis, in Genesis 11 verse 1 is where it says that all had the same language. And then it showed that the people wanted to build the tower up to God. But verse 6 is a key verse that I want to focus on. Verse 6, God says something what I think is just really amazing. He says, "Behold, they are of one people and one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." God himself admits that when people are unified behind a common cause, nothing's impossible. They can do anything, but it takes a big enough group of people to stay united among this common point, this common desire, this common goal. And the other thing that I want to connect this to show how true that really is daylight savings time. Like, now, how does daylight savings time correlate to being able to change the 40-hour, 5-day work week? Well, you may have heard Benjamin Franklin is credited as being the father of daylight savings time. In 1784, Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter to the editor of the something called the Journal of Paris, but it was a letter of satire. And in that letter, he said that we should be able to economize the candle usage if everyone decides to just wake up an hour earlier. But once again, that was a letter of satire, which means he was joking. It wasn't supposed to be taken that serious. And that's why, even though that was in 1784, it took, over 100 years for there to be any real consistent adaptation of that. In 1908 is when you have in Port Arthur, Ontario, Canada, where the first town that actually moved their clocks an hour to change that. But even though that was happening in Canada in 1908, the first world power to actually change it was in 1916 with Germany. But the reason why they did it was because they were in the middle of World War One, and they were just trying to conserve some oil to use in other places and for other things for the war. So the whole point behind it was to help with the war in World War One. And then the United States adapted it in 1918. So they didn't even adapt it until after World War One was actually over. So then you got to go all the way to the 1970s before you have actual widespread usage and widespread adaptation of daylight saving time. The 1970s. Now think about how crazy that is. We as a people actually got together and made a decision to change time. Like, think about it. We're changing time. That that doesn't stop the world from actually turning. The world's still turning, but we're just changing our time. We're just changing our clocks. We as people decide to change time. That's huge. But think about it. We just go along with it and we just accept it, but we don't apply that same principle of a big enough number of people being united behind the same cause to enact change. We don't apply that principle enough, but we have a clear example where it's been done. And there's plenty of other examples to get into, but I love using the daylight savings time as an example because to me that's just huge that we as people decide to change time. When in actuality, you can't change time because again, the world's still turning. We're not forcing the world to rotate backwards once. The world's still turning. Time doesn't change. Time keeps going on. But yet we just decided to change a bunch of clocks. And everyone's just hunky-dory with it. It's all cool. And I'd be remiss to not mention that a good bit of the world just doesn't even observe daylight savings time as well. So we're not even all on the same time frame. I challenge you, look up a map of the world that actually observes daylight savings time. It's a lot of blank spaces in there. I mean, pretty much all of North America does, but there is a whole bunch of places in the world that don't even observe daylight savings time. But yet, we're all cool with it. You know, the ones that do observe it, we just go right along with it. So again, the point I'm trying to make is, if a big enough number of people are united behind the same cause, we can enact change. So we could change this 40-hour, 5-day work week if we really wanted to, if we were organized enough to do so. So that's it for me. I appreciate you being a part of this and listening to this pod. Thank you so much. Join me again next week, and I look forward to it. To another episode of the pod of the Obnoxious Honesty Podcast. Again, if you're interested in being on future episodes, please go ahead and hit me up at the email obnoxioushonestypodcast@gmail.com. In the subject line, go ahead and type what's the subject that you want to talk about, and then in the body, just give me some background of you and your experiences with whatever the subject is, and we'll collaborate. So again, grace and peace to everybody. I'm out.